Hey there, friends. Welcome back to Daily Dose Radio here in the Bible Bistro. Today in the Bible Bistro, we're going to be looking at Psalm 2, verses 4 and 5. And as I mentioned yesterday, this is one of those Psalms that's perfect for Holy Week because we're talking about the Lord Jesus. And today we're going to enter into a little bit of that discussion as we look at verses 4 through 6. Now, yesterday we talked about and we read verses 1 through 3, the kings and the potentates and all the uppity ups and in the high reaches of government in the world, they're doing something. They are counseling together against the Lord and against his anointed. And we have what they say there in verse 3. They want to cast aside his bands, tear them off, and cast them asunder. So now we're going to come to verse 4. And now the vision in the psalm goes from the high places of the earth to the high place in heaven. So we go from one courtroom, wherever that courtroom is on the globe, where the men are deciding, to cast off the Lord's bands. And now we turn our vision to the courtroom in heaven, and we see what the Lord is saying about all of this thronging tumultuously and counseling together against the Lord and his anointed. So let me read for you verses 4, 5, and 6. Again, this is my translation. I don't recommend it. I just read it so that you can read in your translation and we can compare the two. He that dwells in the heavens laughs. The Lord will mock them. He will speak to them in his anger, and in his burning anger will he terrify them. I, even I, have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. All right, well, that's verses 4 and 5. And so you notice that as we turn our gaze to the courtroom in heaven, it's a totally different atmosphere. Instead of raging and instead of tumultuous upheaval, the thronging, and instead of counseling against, the Lord's not talking to anybody. He just laughs. He's laughing at them. So we go from anger and tumult and confusion and all that's going on the earth to the Lord in heaven, and he just laughs. Little man is having his little day. And so the Lord laughs. The Lord will mock them, we have there in verse 4. So the Lord's mocking and he's laughing at these kings. And he will speak to them in his anger, and in his burning anger will he terrify them. And then in verse 6, we have something like we had in verse 3. So in verse 3, we heard the words of the people as they gathered together. Let us tear off his bands from us. In verse 6, we have the Lord speaking. I, even I, have installed my king. Wait a minute, a king? You mean there's a king on the throne someplace that's installed there by the Lord? Yep. And we're going to find out that it's his anointed. And that anointed one is the Christ. And that Christ has come. Well, we'll talk about that when we get to it here in the psalm. I don't want to spill the beans yet, because this is so beautifully. This is written so lovely. Can't you see what I'm doing here? You have the courtroom on earth and all the tumult there. You have the courtroom in heaven and all the laughter there. And then in verse 6, you have the Lord's speech, which is just like the speech in verse 3, except it's completely different. There in verse 3, they're plotting rebellion and speaking it aloud. Here in verse 6, the Lord's not plotting rebellion. He's saying, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put my king on the throne. I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. So that's not going to change. They can tumult all they want. They can resist all they want. They can plan rebellion all they want. It is not going to change the fact that the Lord has established his king upon his holy mountain. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this applies to today, and it also applies to the future. There is going to come a day at the end of the millennial reign of Christ when the nations are going to rise up against the king that is established in Zion by God, and that king that is established in Zion is of the house of David. It's the seed of David. It's the Lord Jesus himself. And there's going to be a rebellion in the earth on that day. So it looks forward to what's going to happen, and it also tells us about actually what's happening right now. So I hope you'll join me again tomorrow, and we will look at verses 7 and 8 and see how the New Testament comes in here and adopts these verses for a lot of the Christology that we have in the New Testament. I hope you'll join me then here on Daily Dose Radio.